I, as a commander, ask myself that question many times, and I really, really struggle with it.
So undoubtedly to the families of the dead and wounded, and of those still serving in Afghanistan. Is it worth the price? Welcome to Four Corners. The war in Afghanistan has now gone longer than World Wars I and II combined, and will be far longer than Vietnam by the final troop withdrawals in 2014. Australia went in to support the US in the wake of September 11, but like America itself, is now looking for a respectable way out, with Afghanistan's security forces inheriting sole combat responsibility in less than 3 years. The latest Taliban attacks in Kabul overnight once again underscore just how tough that task is going to be. The cost in human life and money has been very substantial over time. Thousands dead, including civilians, $500 billion in military spending by America and $7 billion by Australia to the end of this year. Some frontline analysts who know the situation intimately say the success that's been claimed has been overstated. One veteran civil aid expert says locals believe the Taliban could retake the province of Uruzgan within 2 weeks of an Australian troop withdrawal. Tonight, Four Corners looks at what Australia's objectives were going in late 2001 and then going back a second time, and asks leading experts and Afghan war veterans what has been achieved. I'll then seek answers from Defence Minister Stephen Smith. First, the story from reporter Jeff Thompson.
Pinned in this fucking room. Go in outside.
Australian troops putting their lives on the line in Afghanistan.
Yeah, someone go down low, go in.
Just as they do each and every day. Fighting a bloody and expensive war our government rarely wants us to witness.
Back. Move. Go. No, that wasn't it. That was.
The number of coalition soldiers killed here will soon exceed the near 3,000 civilians who died in the September 11 attacks. 32 of them have been Australians. 5 objectives have been repeatedly stated as the reasons for Australia's war in Afghanistan. Objective 1. Honour the ANZUS Defence Treaty with the United States. On September 11, 2001, then Prime Minister John Howard was in Washington. His response to the terrorist attacks was as immediate as it was visceral.
We will stand by them, we will help them, we will support actions they take to properly retaliate in relation to these acts of bastardry. I certainly don't have any regrets about Australian involvement, the instantaneous commitment to stand beside the Americans, and I believe very strongly that if we hadn't have gone into Afghanistan, then there could well have been multiple further attacks. I was making it very plain that we would stand beside the Americans because, given what had happened to them, it was a time for 100% allies, not 70 or 80% allies. And I did see that attack, and I still do, as being an attack on our way of life as much as an attack on the American way of life. And I spoke, I'm sure, at that time for the great bulk of the Australian people.
For the first time in its 50-year history, Australia invoked the ANZUS Treaty.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. Australia, Germany, and France have pledged forces as the operation unfolds.
Well, it's always of advantage to this country to have a close alliance with the most powerful democracy in the world, militarily speaking and economically speaking. I think that's self-evident to the Australian people, and there was a time in history when the strength of that alliance was important to Australia's survival, namely in World War II.
At its heart, it's about supporting an alliance with the United States. That's what got us into this when the ANZUS Treaty was invoked. Is it worth it? I, as a commander, asked myself that question many times, and I really, really struggle with it. The only way I can see through this so that I can sleep at night is to differentiate, to say it's not worth it for the lives that you lose. You could never look at any soldier, sailor or airman and say your life's forfeit for some political purpose. That's just unacceptable. But at the highest level of strategy, and in the dirty, ugly world of international relationships, where it's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, that those lives become less important. And taking that longer-term view, that hard-nosed, realpolitik view that politicians do and must, it's worth it, but not at the human level.
At some point you reach a level where you say, enough's enough, and it's time for us to focus on providing legitimate support to the Allies, but in ways that don't expose young Australians to potentially being the last person to die in a war that we're leaving anyway. I think it's absolutely clear that Australia has done everything and more that was expected of it. So in terms of supporting and honouring the ANZUS alliance, I think we can be very clear that we've achieved that objective.
Objective 2. Deny Al-Qaeda a safe haven in Afghanistan. Denying Al-Qaeda a safe haven has been the most consistently stated justification for the war in Afghanistan.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, I was in the White House attending the senior staff meeting of the National Security Council. Within minutes, we knew this was Al-Qaeda, and we knew we would have to do something about Afghanistan, but there was literally no war plan for going into Afghanistan. What we had was a CIA plan to send in a small number of CIA operatives with $7 million in walking around money to try to bribe Taliban commanders over to our side, and a concept of operations. We would provide air power, and the Northern Alliance would provide the manpower on the ground to topple the Taliban. It turned out to be a very simple plan, and one that worked remarkably quickly, perhaps almost too easily for what came afterwards.
From the outset, Australia was part of the hunt for Al-Qaeda. 150 Special Forces troopers landed in Afghanistan in December 2001. It's estimated there were about 5,000 al-Qaeda fighters in the country at the time. But even before that job was done, the United States was distracted by Iraq.
People in the field in Afghanistan in late December or mid to late December 2001 were already losing support from Central Command headquarters and losing the attention and planning support and air power that they needed to close the door on Osama bin Laden, because the planners had been directed to start focusing on Iraq.
I was aware that America had the possibility of a military operation in Iraq in mind, although it would be wrong to say that any final decision had been taken at the end of 2001.
Osama bin Laden escaped to Pakistan, and since 2002 it has remained the main base of al-Qaeda's operations in the region.
2001 2002 2003 2004 2005 2006 2007 2008 2009 2010 2011 2012 2013 2014 2015 2016 2017 2018 2019 2020 2021 2022 2023 2024 2025 2026 2027 2028 2029 2030 2031 2032 2033 2034 2035 2036 2037 2038 2039 2040 2041 2042 2043 2044 2045 2046 2047 2048 2049 2050 2051 2052 2053 2054 2055 2056 2057 2058 2059 2060 2061 2062 2063 2064 2065 2066 2067 2068 2069 2070 2071 2072 2073 2074 2075 2076 2077 2078 2079 2080 2081 2082 2083 2084 2085 2086 2087 2088 2089 2090 2091 2092 2093 2094 2095 2096 2097 2098 2099 2000 2001 2002 2003 2004 2005 2006 2007 2008 2009 2010 2011 2012 2013 2014 2015 2016 2017 2018
Afghanistan.